They tell you a pilot can't hear the screams from 30,000 feet. They're right. But they never tell you what happens when the screaming starts inside your own skull, years after the canopy closes. After the medals are pinned on, after the flags stop waving and the parade tape is swept away. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the moment my jet became a falling star. The moment my country's war turned into my private prison. And the moment I walked back into American sunlight, carrying a kind of darkness I couldn't surrender at any border. I was shot down. I was captured alive. I was released. And the day they called me free was the day I began to understand what I had really been doing. I grew up in a town that measured virtue in straight lines, straight posture, straight answers, straight flags snapping in clean wind. My father kept a small box in his dresser filled with letters from his brother who never came back from Vietnam. I used to open that box when he wasn't looking. The paper smelled like metal and old smoke, like something you couldn't wash out. When I asked what the letters meant, my father said, "It means you do your job. It means you come home if you can." That sentence raised me more than any sermon. So when the recruiter came to the high school gym with glossy posters of jets streaking through blue, I didn't hear politics. I heard the promise of purpose. I wanted the cockpit the way some boys wanted the ball field. Up there, I told myself it would be simple. You'd have an objective, a heading, a target. You'd be the clean hand of a clean country. I believed, with a child's arrogance, that being above the world made you above the mess. Flight school took that belief and forged it into something harder. They taught us that hesitation kills, that emotion clouds judgment, that you can't carry every life you might affect because your own hands would shake. In the classroom, Vietnam was a map with red arrows and boxed-in supply routes. In the simulator, it was a set of threat SAM sights, AAA bursts, MiG silhouettes. In the barracks, it was a joke, a song, a countdown. Beneath all of it was a steady hum of certainty. We were the good guys, and good guys didn't have to doubt. The first time I crossed the coastline, the world below looked like a painted bowl. River veins, rice paddies, little grids of rooftops. My oxygen mask tasted like rubber and sweat. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the sky didn't care who was right. It was just sky. Then the bombs went. After the first strike, my hands didn't shake. That scared me more than the flak. I stared at the smoke and waited for guilt to arrive like a delayed radio call. Nothing came, only silence and a hollow pride. From altitude, the explosions were neat blossoms. From altitude, the fire was a color orange, then gray. From altitude, you could convince yourself you were striking infrastructure and logistics. You could say secondary. explosions, and feel smart. You could say, "Good hits," and keep your voice flat. The first time I saw a village flare like match heads, I told myself the people had been warned. I told myself the enemy was hiding there. I told myself the truth must be inside the briefings, not inside my eyes. But there were moments that broke through the helmet of training. A thin line of smoke that didn't spread like an ammo dump. A scattering of figures running toward a tree line, too small to be soldiers, too many to be combatants. The way my wingman went quiet after one strike. Then spoke again with a voice one shade lower, as if he'd swallowed something sharp. Back at base, we were rewarded for efficiency. The board showed sorties like points. The colonel congratulated us for discipline. We drank and tried to forget the smell of jet fuel on our skin. We called it decompression, as if the soul had a pressure valve. The day I was shot down began like the others. A briefing room, a pointer tapping a map, a target name that sounded like a factory. Weather, marginal, threat, high, objective, necessary. We were told the strike would shorten the war. We were always told that. Over the target, the sky erupted. Black puffs of flak blossomed around me like poisonous flowers. The warning tone screamed in my headset. I rolled hard left, then right, trying to outrun geometry. The aircraft shuddered like a living thing hit in the ribs. I smelled something hot and electrical. The engine coughed. I remember saying, "I'm hit," with the calm voice I'd been trained to use, as if my own death was another line item. Then the controls went soft, then wrong. The nose dipped. The horizon tilted. The sky, which had always felt like a promise, became a trap door. Ejecting is not heroic. It is violence done to your spine. The canopy blew, and the wind punched me, and the seat fired like a cannon. For a split second, I saw my jet flames licking the fuselage, spinning away toward the earth. I had a stupid thought that I should apologize to it for breaking it. Then the parachute opened and the world slowed. Below me, the ground was green and brown, and suddenly not a map. I could see people moving tiny dots, becoming bodies, bodies becoming faces. I could hear shouting, not through a radio, but through air. I felt the first true fear of the war, not the controlled fear of dogfights, but the naked fear of being a man, falling into someone else's grief. I landed hard in a field, my legs folding under me. Before I could unclip the harness, hands were on me. Not the hands of soldiers I'd pictured in briefings, but hands with dirt under the nails. Hands that shook with anger. Hands that had learned to work and suffer. Someone struck me. Someone screamed words I didn't understand, and yet I understood them anyway. They tied my wrists and pulled me along a path. As we passed a line of huts, I saw a woman holding a child on her hip. The child stared at me, unblinking. There was no hatred in that gaze, only a kind of stunned, exhausted curiosity, like he was trying to decide whether I was human. That look followed me into captivity. It follows me still. They moved me at night because night is kinder to the captor. Darkness turns a parade of anger into a simple transfer. My wrists were tied so tight my fingers went numb, and every step sent a bolt of pain through the heel I'd bruise, landing in that field. I kept telling myself to stay upright because I still believed posture could protect me. The first room was not the movie version. No dramatic interrogation lights. No polished villain with a cigarette. It was a concrete space that smelled of damp cloth and boiled rice. A single bulb dangled from a wire like a tired eye. The man who questioned me looked more exhausted than cruel. He asked my name, my unit, my targets. I gave him the lines they had trained us to give: rank, serial number, date of birth. My voice sounded brave until it didn't. Days blurred. You lose time in captivity the way you lose altitude in a dying aircraft, slowly at first, then all at once. My body learned new languages: hunger, thirst, stiffness, the small humiliations that scrape dignity off like sandpaper. In the corner of a cell, a metal bucket waited like an accusation. Rats came at night, bold as veterans. When I slept, I dreamed of jet engines and woke to silence so complete it felt like punishment. The worst part was not the discomfort. The worst part was the mirror they held up without ever handing me a mirror. They marched me through villages sometimes, not for spectacle, but for logistics. I would see a woman washing clothes in a river, her hands red from cold water. I would see a man repairing a bicycle with a patience that looked like prayer. And I would see children, always children, thin as reeds, watching me with that same exhausted curiosity. In their faces, I recognized something I had never allowed myself to imagine: jokes, favorite foods, mothers who scolded them, brothers who scolded them, and tiny daily miracles they fought to keep. Once, during a transfer, a boy no older than 10 handed me a piece of sugar cane. His guard slapped his hand away and barked at him. But the boy had already pressed the cane into my bound fingers. I didn't know what to do with kindness in a place built from fear. I chewed slowly, tasting sweetness, and something in my throat tightened until breathing hurt. I wanted to tell him, in whatever words existed, that I was sorry. Instead, I swallowed, because sorry is a luxury prisoners can't afford. I met other Americans. We spoke in taps and coughs, traded names, traded small jokes. Some men clung to anger because it kept them warm. Some clung to faith. I clung to one belief: my country would come. When that belief began to rot, I felt the stench in my own chest, but rescue didn't come. Time did. One afternoon, my interrogator brought a newspaper. It was old, creased, and smelled like mildew, but the photographs were sharp enough to cut. There were images of burned children running down a road, their skin shiny with pain. There were bodies wrapped in cloth, lined up like inventory. There were captions I could not read, and yet the story was clear. War, stripped of official language, looks the same in every alphabet. I pushed the paper away and told myself it was propaganda. That was my last clean lie. That night, I lay on the hard floor and listened to the building breathe. Somewhere down the hall, someone moaned in sleep. I tried to imagine the factory we'd been ordered to hit. I tried to match that briefing room word to the faces in the photographs. I couldn't. The map in my head cracked. Through the cracks seeped a grief that tasted like jet fuel and sugar cane. In captivity, you begin to replay your life in loops, like a film that has been burned and repaired too many times. I saw my father's dresser box. I saw the recruiter's posters. I saw myself laughing in the barracks, bragging about sorties like points on a scoreboard. I saw the moment after my first strike when I waited for guilt and nothing came. Now, guilt came late and heavy, like a cargo plane landing on your chest. They asked me to record statements. I refused. My silence was my only mercy. One day, during a rare moment outside, I watched an old man mend a fence. His back was bent like a question mark. A small girl stood beside him, handing him nails from a tin. She hummed while she worked, a tune that rose and fell like waves. I realized with a cold clarity that I had probably flown over that exact kind of scene and never once considered it sacred. I had called it terrain. The shame of that word did not leave me. It settled in my bones. Even now, I hear the engine whine in that silence. When my guard brought my rice bowl that night, I asked him slowly, clumsily, he had a family. He stared at me as if I'd asked to borrow his heart. After a long silence, he said one word and touched his chest with 2 fingers. Then he pointed outward, toward the dark where villages slept, and his face tightened. It wasn't hatred. It was grief so disciplined it had become a uniform. In that moment, I understood something simple and unbearable. Everyone in this war was someone's son, and I was all at once, the man in the cockpit and the man falling from it, the hunter and the hunted, the country's tool and my own ruined conscience. I stopped praying to be saved. I started praying to be forgiven. My release came without trumpets, just paperwork, guarded handshakes, and a silence that felt rehearsed. They told me to wash, gave me a clean shirt that hung loose on my ribs, and put me on a bus. Through the window, I watched the countryside I'd once called terrain drift by, paddies, river bends, smoke from cooking fires. Ordinary life, still alive, despite everything I've done above it. At the airfield, an American officer greeted us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He spoke like a man reading a script. Welcome home. You did your duty. The nation is proud. I tried to absorb the words like medicine. They slid right through me. On the flight back, they fed us steaks and ice cream and handed us newspapers with our faces on the front. Hero pilot returns, one headline shouted. A reporter asked how it felt to be free. I said, grateful, because that was the approved word. Inside, I saw a child's unblinking eyes and a road full of burned skin. At the base, there were flags and cameras and wives in bright dresses. My mother hugged me so hard, I thought my ribs would crack. My father stood behind her, older than the day I left, his jaw working as if he had to chew down all the words he'd saved. When he finally spoke, it was the same sentence from my childhood, worn smooth by time. You came home. I wanted to say, not all of me. I carried my freedom like stone, heavy, cold, and loud. They debriefed us in windowless rooms. The questions were technical and comforting in their precision. Locations, names, routines. When I tried to mention the boy who offered sugarcane or the photographs of civilians, a major lifted his hand as if stopping a leak. Actionable intelligence, Captain, he said. My rank sounded like a cage. They offered counseling, but it came wrapped in phrases like readjustment and performance. They taught us how to answer reporters without saying too much. They taught us how to smile. They taught us, again, that hesitation kills. At night, my body returned to the cell. I would wake with my heart hammering, certain I could hear rats in the walls of my American bedroom. I would step into the shower and stand under scalding water, trying to wash off a smell that wasn't there. My wife, new, patient, frightened, would ask what I needed. I would say nothing. That became my second language. The first time I drove past a playground, I had to pull over. The shrieks of children, happy shrieks, made my hands clamp the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I realized the war had stolen something I never knew I owned. The ability to hear laughter without waiting for it to turn into screams. I tried to be the man everyone wanted. I went to banquets, shook hands, posed for photos. Veterans slapped my back and said, "You showed M." I listened to speeches about honor and victory and felt a slow nausea rise. The story was always cropped clean edges, no bodies outside the frame. Then, one afternoon, I saw a protest on television. Students and mothers and priests marched with signs. Some burned flags, some cried. The commentator called them traitors. I should have changed the channel. Instead, I sat down as if someone had pushed a weight onto my shoulders. A woman on the screen held up a picture of a Vietnamese child. She shouted, "This is what we're doing." The camera panned, and for a split second, the image matched the one in my interrogator's newspaper. My stomach turned. My mind did something it had never done in uniform. It connected the briefings to the faces. I went to a meeting in a church basement under the excuse of curiosity. I told myself I would just listen. The room smelled like coffee and damp coats. People talked about villages, about napalm, about draft notices, about sons who came home in boxes. When it was my turn to speak, I felt my throat close. Then I heard my own voice say, I was there. The room went still. A young man with long hair stared at me like I was a ghost. I expected hate. Instead, I saw something worse. Hope. They wanted me to confirm the truth they suspected. They wanted me to be proof. That night I sat in my car with both hands on the wheel and didn't start the engine. The sadness in me wasn't dramatic. It was steady, a low, endless note. I thought about the boy with the sugarcane, my father's letters, and the word hero in print. I realized America had handed me freedom without teaching me how to live with what I knew. I could have stayed silent. Silence would have been safer. Silence would have let me keep my medals and my invitations and my clean story. But I had already learned in a cell with no sky that silence can be a weapon too. So I wrote a speech. I rewrote it 10 times. I tried to make it gentle. I tried to make it patriotic. In the end, it was just honest. The day I spoke out, I wore my service dress. I wanted no one to accuse me of hiding. I stood at a podium in a small hall while cameras buzzed like flies. My hands shook. Not from fear of death, but from fear of truth. I flew missions over Vietnam, I said. I believed I was protecting my country. I believed the war could be won clean. I was wrong. We are breaking bodies we will never see, and we are breaking our own souls along with them. When I finished, there was a silence that felt like a door closing. Then the shouting began. They didn't have to invent a new punishment for me. America already had one. Name me a traitor and let my own people do the rest. The morning after my speech, my phone rang before sunrise. A man's voice, thick with rage, told me to go back to where they brainwashed you. Another said he hoped I'd been tortured worse. Someone mailed a photograph of my house with the windows circled in red marker. The message was simple. We know where your family sleeps. The military asked me to keep a low profile, which sounded like a polite way of saying, "Stop embarrassing us." On base, the stares changed. Men who had once clasped my hand now looked through me. Some warned me in whispers, as if truth were contraband. Others confronted me, coward, communist, Judas faces flushed with grief. A lieutenant I'd mentored shouted, "My brother died out there. How dare you?" I carried that brother too, but my words would not reach him. My wife started checking the locks twice. She stopped answering unknown calls. Sometimes, in the grocery store, a stranger would recognize me and hiss, "Benedict Arnold," as if history were a weapon you could swing at a living man. I learned to keep my head down. I learned to watch every room for exits. In captivity, my body had learned fear. Now my country taught it a new dialect. The strangest thing was that I missed the certainty. In uniform, the world was divided into friend and enemy, mission and failure. As an activist, everything blurred. I met mothers who begged me to stop speaking because their sons were still deployed. I met veterans who agreed with me in private but couldn't say so aloud. I met students who wanted to burn everything down, and I had to tell them, ashes don't build peace. I traveled to campuses and town halls. Sometimes half the seats were empty. Sometimes people stood in the aisles. Every time I stepped to a microphone, my stomach clenched like I was about to eject again. I told the story the simplest way I could. The map cracking, the child's stare, the photographs, the guards' grief, the sadness always leaked through. It wasn't theater. It was residue. Reporters wanted a slogan. "Are you anti-American?" they asked. "Do you hate our troops?" I learned to answer slowly, like defusing a bomb. I love my country enough to refuse to lie for it, I said. And I love our troops enough to refuse to waste them. Some nights, after a speech, a veteran would approach me quietly. He would stand too close, as if he needed to borrow my steadiness. Then he would say, almost inaudibly, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one who couldn't sleep. Those moments kept me alive, not because they felt like victory, but because they felt like connection to damaged men, admitting the damage was real. Other nights, the hate one, I would return to a hotel and find a note slid under my door. "Traitor." I would sit on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the wall, listening for footsteps. In those hours, I felt again the concrete floor, the bucket, the rats. The war had followed me home like a shadow that learned my address. The turning point came at a community center. A Vietnamese refugee my age, hair already cradled me. about his village, the river, the herb garden, the sound of bowls clinking at dinner. Then he described the day the sky screamed and the village became fire. He recited names like prayers. I waited for anger. He only said, quietly, "We are both alive." Okay. Oh. I felt the room tilt. My mouth went dry. I waited for his anger. Instead, he placed his hand over his heart and said, "We are both alive." Oh. That means we have work. Those words didn't excuse me. They didn't absolve me. They simply gave my breathing a direction. Work, not punishment, not revenge. Work, that word cut through me. After that, my speeches changed. I stopped trying to sound convincing. I stopped trying to be balanced. I spoke the truth as plainly as I could. War is a machine that eats the poor first, the young second, and the honest last. It turns people into targets and targets into numbers. It makes you cheer for explosions because you can't bear to imagine what's inside them. I testified at hearings. I wrote, upped. I marched with men who had once worn the same patches I did, now walking with canes and haunted eyes. We were called a disgrace. We were called an embarrassment. We were told we were helping the enemy. But the enemy I was fighting now was not a country. It was the lie that violence is the only language of power. The accusations never stopped. My old squadron stopped inviting me to reunions. My promotion stalled. Friends drifted away like planes changing formation. Sometimes I would see a flag in a neighbor's yard and feel a stab of longing so sharp it surprised me. I still loved that flag. I just couldn't keep pretending it covered everything. People ask if I regret speaking out. I regret the missions. I regret the bombs. I regret the moments when I waited for guilt and found only pride. I regret the lives that ended under a sky I once called beautiful. But I do not regret telling the truth, because every night when the house is quiet, I can still see that child's eyes in the village, the exhausted curiosity, the question of whether I was human. I am still trying to answer him. I am still trying to be human. And I believe, with a faith I had to rebuild from wreckage, that peace is not a weakness. Peace is the mission that never asks for bodies. It is the hardest kind of courage. If this story hits you in that quiet place, you don't talk about stay with it. Don't scroll past the pain like it's just another headline. If you've served or lost someone who did or carried a war home in silence, tell me in the comments, what's the one sound, image, or memory you can't shake? You don't have to explain it perfectly, just name it. Sometimes naming is how we survive. And if you believe still that peace is worth standing up for, even when you get called a traitor. then like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the hardest battles aren't always in the sky. Sometimes they're in the conscience.